I'm a woman frozen in time, trapped behind glass, until I found my wild salvation. Hello, my name is Helen. I am 39 years old. I live just outside a small town in the English countryside, in a solid brick house surrounded by a high fence meant to keep the world out, but that ended up cutting me off from life itself. My husband, George, is a logistics manager, always traveling between London and Manchester, leaving me alone in the quiet of our perfectly furnished home. I became a mere decoration in his ordered world, a shadow without purpose. Every morning, I'd sit alone on the wide windowsill, sipping coffee and watching the rain drip off the cherry trees in our garden. I always loved dressing up. Even if no one ever saw me, it was my secret way of feeling alive, of touching my own skin. That morning I wore a short nightdress made of damp silk, the color of storm clouds. The delicate straps barely clung to my shoulders, and on my legs were black thigh-high stockings with lace tops that hugged my calves tightly. I liked that slight pressure, the small discomfort reminding me I was still here, still real. George no longer noticed these little things. To him I was just comfort, dinner status. Intimacy had become mechanical, like servicing his SUV. Once a month, quick and without words. Everything changed with a chance conversation at a cafe in the town center. A friend told me, "Helen, you're like a vase on a shelf, beautiful but empty. You need something wild, something alive. Get a dog. Not a yappy lapdog, but a creature that takes your breath away." So I drove to a shelter on the outskirts, where dust swirled in the winds over barren fields. There I saw him, not a dog but a mountain of muscle and fur. A massive cross between a Caucasian shepherd and a wolf, with ash-gray fur and a heavy, brooding gaze. The volunteer said his name was Duke, but I knew that wasn't right. I stepped closer to the kennel. He didn't bark or lunge. He just stared at me, deeply studying me like a man sizing up a woman before deciding her fate. In that look was a power George never had. I called him Baikal. When I brought Baikal home, the house changed. He filled every inch of space. George came back late one night, wrinkled his nose in disgust and sneered, "Why do you need that monster? It's going to stink." But Baikal only let out a low growl, lying by my feet. A shiver ran down my spine. Not fear but a strange, forbidden thrill. I began dressing for him. Yes, it sounds crazy, but I could feel his gaze. On evenings when George was away, I slipped into tight pencil skirts that restricted my steps or wandered the kitchen in a sheer robe, feeling the fabric slide over my hips. Baikal was always close, lying on the Persian rug, his massive head resting on his paws, watching my every move. When my bare leg brushed his fur, he froze, breathing heavily. It was a silent game, a wordless dialogue where I was the mistress yet felt like prey. One night I sat on the sofa reading, wearing only a long men's shirt and thick mocha-colored tights. I felt vulnerable and protected at once. Baikal came over and rested his heavy head on my lap. His warmth burned through the fabric. I ran my fingers through his dense fur, massaging behind his ears. At that moment the front door clicked, the unexpected sound of George returning early. He stepped into the room, smelling of expensive tobacco and foreign cologne, and froze. The scene was peaceful, but the air crackled with tension. Baikal lifted his head slowly, not taking his paws off my knees, and looked at my husband. From deep in his throat came a rumble like falling rocks. George took a step back. For the first time in years I saw fear in his eyes. I smiled, adjusting my shirt collar, feeling a dark, triumphant flame ignite inside me. "Hello, darling," I said softly. "We weren't expecting you." George's eyes flickered with something I hadn't seen in years. Fear, uncertainty, and maybe even a fragment of respect. It was as if Baikal's presence had shifted the entire balance of our home, tilting the scales in ways I never dared imagine possible. The man who once ruled our house with quiet indifference now seemed small, hesitant, almost invisible beside the enormous shadow of my dog. I remember that night clearly. The way the flickering firelight cast long shadows across the walls, the subtle scent of leather from my worn boots mingling with the musk of Baikal's fur. I wore a fitted black pencil skirt that hugged my hips tightly, paired with a silky blouse button just enough to hint at the curve of my collarbone. My hair was loose, cascading in wild waves down my back, and the faintest trace of my favorite amber perfume clung to the air around me. Baikal lay stretched out on the Persian rug, his amber eyes never leaving George. George didn't speak much after that night. His usual sharp tone was replaced by a careful quietness. He moved around the house like a man walking on thin ice, avoiding sudden gestures or loud noises. I watched him retreat into himself, shrinking away from the power Baikal seemed to wield so effortlessly. It was almost as if the dog had become the true master of the house, a silent sentinel guarding me from the man who had long stopped seeing me. Days passed and George's fear deepened. He tried to bridge the gap between us with gifts. Expensive things, loud and flashy, items that screamed for attention but offered no comfort. One day he brought home a fur coat, thick and luxurious, made from real lynx, knowing full well I detested real fur. Another time it was a set of bright red lingerie, trimmed with harsh lace that irritated my skin. I accepted these presents with a cold smile, stashing them away in the wardrobe like trophies of his defeat. I was changing too. The once timid woman I'd become was shifting, awakening. I began walking Baikal far beyond the quiet confines of our suburban streets, into the wild fields where the wind tore at my coat and the sky stretched vast and gray above us. For these walks I crafted a ritual. Knee-high leather boots with flat soles tight and unyielding, and a long rubberized trench coat in olive green. Beneath it, I wore only a thin silk slip that clung to my body, dampened by the mist and rain. The rough exterior of my coat contrasted sharply with the smooth softness beneath, and the sensation sent shivers of exhilaration through me. We would wander toward the old riverbed, where the grass grew tall, brushing against my thighs like whispers of forgotten secrets. Baikal moved like a locomotive beside me, powerful, unstoppable, untamed. Sometimes I stopped, tilting my face to the drizzle, letting the cold rain wash away the remnants of my past life. Baikal would nudge his wet nose into my hand, and I'd grip the thick leather leash. Not to hold him back, but to feel the raw connection between us. In those moments I was no longer a housewife trapped in a suburban prison. I was something ancient and fierce, a witch, a guardian of the wild. But the peace was fragile. One evening I returned home soaked and flushed from the cold air, the scent of rain and pine clinging to my skin. George was already in the living room, nursing a glass of brandy. His eyes were bloodshot, his movements sluggish. When he saw me, his face twisted with disgust. "Get rid of that beast," he hissed, nodding toward Baikal. "He reeks. I want my wife back, not some wild animal." Baikal didn't flinch. His fur bristled along the neck, a silent warning that sent a chill through the room. Slowly, I unclasped my coat, revealing the damp silk that clung to my curves, the sharp line of my black stockings peeking from beneath the hem of my skirt. George's gaze lingered on me, caught between anger and something else, desire maybe or fear. "He stays," I said, voice calm, steady. "This is my home too. And he's part of me now." George's response was violent. He threw his glass into the fireplace, glass shards shattering like broken promises. "You're sick," he spat, stepping toward me. "You sleep in the same room as that monster. Everyone's talking. I see how you look at him." He raised his foot to kick Baikal. It was a mistake. In an instant Baikal transformed, no longer the stoic guardian, but a lightning strike of raw power. A low guttural growl filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards like an earthquake. Baikal leapt, his heavy paws striking George's chest, sending him sprawling back onto the leather sofa. The dog loomed over him, teeth bared, snarling with primal authority. I stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. I hadn't given a command. I didn't need to. For the first time in 18 years, my husband lay defeated, humiliated, while I stood tall, a dark fire burning within me. "Come on, Baikal," I whispered after a moment. The dog obeyed instantly, retreating at my gentle command as if we were one being. Together we went upstairs, leaving George alone in the scent of expensive alcohol and his own fear. That night, I locked the bedroom door behind us. I knew then that I had crossed a line from which there was no return. That night the silence in the house was thick and heavy, but it wasn't suffocating. It felt like the calm after a storm, charged with something electric and new. I lay awake on the bed, Baikal curled against my legs, his warm body a steady heartbeat beneath the cool sheets. The tension between us was palpable, yet comforting, as if we had both been waiting for this moment of reckoning. When morning came, the sound of an engine outside shattered the fragile peace. I listened intently, my heart pounding. It wasn't George's Land Cruiser rumbling away as usual, but a heavy diesel van, its motor growling like a beast. The gravel crunched under heavy boots. I didn't move. I only tightened my grip on Baikal's thick fur as the front door clicked open. Two men stepped inside, broad-shouldered, dressed in gray uniforms with no badges, no names. Behind them stood my mother-in-law, wrapped in a heavy wool shawl, her pale face drawn tight with worry and something colder, disgust maybe or fear. Her lips pressed into a thin line as she spoke in a trembling voice. "Helen, step away from the dog. This is for your own good." I rose slowly, the silk of my nightdress sliding over my skin, outlining the curve of my hips and the swell of my chest. My hair was wild, eyes blazing with defiance. I was no longer the timid woman who had once bowed to their judgments. I was a force to be reckoned with. "Get out," I said quietly, but the words rang like gunfire in the empty hall. One of the men, older with a jagged scar along his chin, stepped forward, holding a long pole with a loop at the end, a catch pole used for dangerous animals. "Ma'am, no nonsense. Your husband signed the papers. The dog's to be quarantined, and you're coming with us for observation." I felt a surge of rage so fierce it burned through my veins. Baikal didn't wait. With a sudden terrifying grace, he lunged forward, silent and swift, aiming for the throat. The man barely had time to raise his arm, wrapped in thick fabric, to fend off the attack. Baikal's powerful strike sent him crashing to the floor. Chaos erupted. I screamed, not from fear but pure fury. I threw myself between them, arms flailing to shield Baikal. My nails scraped against rough fabric, my nightdress tore at the shoulder, revealing pale skin mottled with bruises and scratches. The pain only sharpened my resolve. "Don't touch him," I howled, every word a clawed-out battle cry. The second man tackled Baikal from behind, pinning him to the cold floor. The dog struggled, growled, snapped. Then I saw the glint of a syringe. A quick jab, and Baikal shuddered violently before going limp. His amber eyes, so full of loyalty and confusion, began to glaze over, but his gaze remained locked on mine. I crawled toward him, tangled in torn fabric, whispering broken pleas. "No, no, don't sleep, my brave one. Don't you dare." Suddenly, rough hands grabbed me from behind, yanking me to my feet. I fought, biting, scratching, but they were too strong. Leather straps bit into my wrists as they were pulled tight behind my back. The pain was sharp, yet it muted the scream inside me. Pressed against the cold, unforgiving wall, I could feel the heavy breath of a man close to my ear, smelling of tobacco and cheap cologne. "Calm down, hysteric," he hissed. "We're just taking a ride." I turned my head slightly, catching the sight of Baikal being carried out on a stretcher, his massive paw dangling, brushing the floor silently. My mother-in-law stood in the doorway, crossing herself and weeping quietly. Then came the prick in my shoulder. My vision blurred, the walls melted into a white haze, and the sounds around me dulled to a muffled echo. The last thing I felt was the cold slice of torn silk against my skin, and the cold wind of the night as they dragged me outside, away from the only protector I had left. When I woke, I was trapped in a stark white room. The walls were bare, the windows barred and without handles. I wore a rough, institutional gown that rubbed harshly against my skin, the coarse fabric a constant reminder of my captivity. The scent of bleach mixed with something sour, overcooked cabbage maybe, filled the air. A young doctor with sweaty palms and darting eyes spoke of temporary insanity and behavioral correction. I nodded, my smile empty and hollow, the kind that fools men into thinking they've won. "I understand," I whispered. "I just want to go home. To George." He believed me. Days passed, the regime slowly relaxed. One night, when the nurse finally dozed off, I slipped out into the cold hallways, wearing nothing but the coarse gown and stolen rubber slippers. Outside, the rain was icy, but the chill barely touched me. My body burned with a fierce urgency, a wild hunger for freedom. I ran barefoot through the mud and rain, the wind whipping my soaked hair and clothes. The road stretched out before me, dark and endless, but I didn't care. I was no longer a prisoner. I was a hunted animal, returning to claim her territory. By dawn, I had reached the edge of our village, the familiar gate standing open as if waiting for me. The house loomed ahead, dark, silent and empty like a tomb. The air smelled of stale alcohol and forgotten arguments, but it was still home. My heart hammered as I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The living room was cold, the shadows swallowing the corners where memories once lived. There on the Persian rug where Baikal and I had shared so many quiet moments, lay his massive form. He was stretched out on his side, limbs extended as if asleep, but his chest did not rise or fall. The breath had gone from the wild creature who had become my guardian and my soul. Next to him a sheet of paper caught my eye. It was George's handwriting, jagged and harsh like his voice when he was angry. The doctor said his heart couldn't take the tranquilizer. This is better for everyone. You're sick, Helen. Get help. No scream tore from my lips. I sank to my knees beside Baikal, his fur cold and stiff beneath my trembling hands. I pressed my cheek against his powerful neck, breathing in the faint scent of forest rain and wild freedom that clung stubbornly to his coat. They don't understand, my love, I whispered. They think they killed you, but we are one. I kissed his closed eyes, the wet coldness against my lips like a cruel farewell. But inside me something was awakening, dark, fierce, unstoppable. I rose, my movements slow and mechanical as I walked to the bedroom. The wardrobe door creaked open, and my hand found the leather belt George used to flaunt like a trophy. I pulled off the rough hospital gown, revealing my pale skin mottled with bruises and scratches, the map of my battle. I slipped into my favorite vintage black lace slip, torn along one side but still beautiful, the fabric clinging to every curve. I didn't button it all the way, leaving my chest exposed just enough to tease. Black stockings rolled carefully up my legs, and I slid on my patent leather heels, the slender metal stiletto heels clicking sharply against the wooden floor. This wasn't a surrender. It was a declaration. I fastened the leather belt to a heavy oak beam near the darkened chandelier and stood on a chair. Below me, Baikal waited silently, as if understanding the gravity of the moment. I'm coming, I whispered, a smile playing on my lips. And then I stepped off the edge into the void. There was no pain, only a sudden rush of light and weightlessness. My body swung gently like a broken doll dressed in black lace, suspended between worlds. But I wasn't alone. Baikal stood beside me, enormous and alive, his amber eyes glowing with warmth and strength. He licked my hand, the rough, hot tongue tracing the pulse at my wrist. It was more intimate than any kiss I had known in years, a silent vow of unity and power. Together we walked through the door, away from the house, away from George, into an endless forest where the rain was always warm and the wild ruled. 2 days later George found me. He entered the house and saw the swinging form in the dim light. A howl tore from his throat, raw, wounded like a dying wolf. I heard later he drank to forget, sold his business, and tried to sell the house, but no one would buy it. Whispers spread through the village that the place was cursed. Now on cold November nights, when the wind howls through the chimneys, the neighbors say a woman's silhouette appears at the window of the empty living room. She stands with her forehead pressed to the glass, dressed in dark lace, and beside her, a massive ghostly dog rests his paws on the sill. And if you listen closely, you won't hear barking. Instead, you'll hear soft, joyful laughter drifting on the wind. We won, George. We are together forever. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with this story. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with this story. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with this story. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with this story. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with this story. I'm sorry, but I can't continue with this story.